Hello, this is Dr. Hall, and in this video I'm going to be demonstrating to you the structures of the kidney. So what we have in front of us here is a model of a kidney. We have two kidneys, one on each side. They are these kind of bean-shaped structures. And the kidney has a tough outer covering, which is called the renal capsule. So we have the renal capsule covers the surface of the kidney. And then when we look at the internal structures of the kidney, there is an outer region here that's kind of like a rind, right? Like the rind of a watermelon. This outer region is called the renal cortex. Then we have a middle region here, which is called the renal medulla, and the innermost, which is the renal pelvis. So now we're going to take a closer look at each of those regions and the structures we're going to find. Out in the renal cortex is where we're going to find the glomeruli and the convoluted tubules and some of the peritubular capillaries, as well as the afferent and efferent arterioles. We'll get to those in a minute. In the medulla, we are going to find these structures that look a little bit like candy corn. These are the renal pyramids, and they're full of collecting ducts and renal or nephron loops, and they're bringing urine down into the center of the kidney. So in the renal medulla, we have medullary pyramids or renal pyramids, each one of these candy corn-like structures. The urine then, once it drains down the renal pyramids, is going to enter into a cup-like structure that leads into a tube. This is a calyx. We have little ones called minor calyxes that then combine together to form a major calyx. So the renal calyxes are going to collect the urine from the renal pyramids, bring it down into the renal pelvis. From here, the urine is going to move down into this tube called the ureter, which is going to take it all the way down to the bladder. So renal capsule, renal cortex, renal medulla with the pyramids. In between the pyramids are columns that carry blood vessels, renal calyx, renal pelvis, and ureter. So let's take a closer look at what's going on in that renal cortex. Okay, so as you know, blood is going to come into the kidney, and then it's going to branch into smaller and smaller arteries and eventually come out into what's called an afferent arteriole, which is going to bring it to the glomerulus, the capillary. Then blood is going to move out through an efferent arteriole and into peritubular capillaries, and then eventually into veins that are then going to leave the kidney. For the structures of the nephron, from the glomerulus, solutes and fluid, right, are going to move out into the capsule here called the nephron capsule or Bowman's capsule. And then it's going to move into this first squiggly tube called the proximal convoluted tubule. Then the beginning filtrate is going to move down the nephron loop, sometimes also called the loop of Henle. And so this first part is the descending limb, and then we have the ascending limb of the loop. And then we go into the distal convoluted tubule. And then finally, the filtrate is pretty much turned into urine by this point. It's going to move into the collecting duct, which is going to bring it down through the renal pyramid, where eventually it'll drain into a calyx and then the renal pelvis. So again, here's our afferent arteriole, glomerular capillary, Bowman's capsule, proximal convoluted tubule, nephron loop, descending loop, ascending loop, distal convoluted tubule, collecting duct. Now if we look on this side, we see the same thing, but it's kind of mirror imaged. So always be careful. If it's the tube leading from Bowman's capsule, it is the proximal convoluted tubule. And then as that moves down into the descending loop, ascending loop, then the distal convoluted tubule is the one that drains into the collecting duct. So always be careful about that. We're going to take a closer look at a glomerulus now. And so here we see the afferent has affection for, is moving toward afferent arteriole that then is bringing blood into the glomerular capillary, and then it will leave out through the efferent arteriole after filtration has occurred, right? And fluid and solutes have moved into Bowman's capsule, and then it's going to move into the proximal tubule. So you notice these little interesting cells here and here. These are specialized cells that we find adjacent to the afferent arteriole and one of the distal convoluted tubules. This is called the Juxtaglomerular Apparatus, or JGA. And this is important because it's involved in blood pressure homeostasis. It's part of the renin-angiotensin system of hormones for regulating fluid volume and blood pressure. So this structure right here and here, these are part of the JGA, or Juxtaglomerular Apparatus.